Some Learned Fables, for good old boys and girls in 3 parts. Part first. How the animals of the wood sent out a scientific expedition. Once the creatures of the forest held a great convention, and appointed a commission consisting of the most illustrious scientists among them to go forth, clear beyond the forest and out into the unknown and unexplored world, to verify the truth of the matters already taught in their schools and colleges, and also to make discoveries. It was the most imposing enterprise of the kind the nation had ever embarked in. True, the government had once sent Dr. Bullfrog with a picked crew to hunt for a northwesterly passage through the swamp to the right-hand corner of the wood, and had since sent out many expeditions to hunt for Dr. Bullfrog. But they never could find him, and so government finally gave him up, and ennobled his mother to show its gratitude for the services her son had rendered to science. And once government sent Sir Grasshopper to hunt for the sources of the rill that emptied into the swamp, and afterward sent out many expeditions to hunt for Sir Grass, and at last they were successful. They found his body, but if he had discovered the sources meantime, he did not let on. So government acted handsomely by deceased, and many envied his funeral. But these expeditions were trifles compared with the present one, for this one comprised among its servants the very greatest among the learned, and besides it was to go to the utterly unvisited regions believed to lie beyond the mighty forest, as we have remarked before. How the members were banqueted and glorified and talked about. Everywhere that one of them showed himself, straightway there was a crowd to gape and stare at him. Finally they set off, and it was a sight to see the long procession of dry land tortoises heavily laden with savants, scientific instruments, glowworms and fireflies for signal service, provisions, ants and tumblebugs to fetch and carry and delve, spiders to carry the surveying chain and do other engineering duty, and so forth and so on. And after the tortoises came another long train of ironclads, stately and spacious mud turtles for marine transportation service, and from every tortoise and every turtle flaunted a flaming gladiolus or other splendid banner. At the head of the column, a great band of bumblebees, mosquitoes, katydids and crickets discoursed martial music, and the entire train was under the escort and protection of 12 picked regiments of the army worm. At the end of 3 weeks the expedition emerged from the forest and looked upon the great unknown world. Their eyes were greeted with an impressive spectacle. A vast level plain stretched before them, watered by a sinuous stream, and beyond there towered up against the sky a long and lofty barrier of some kind, they did not know what. The tumblebug said he believed it was simply land tilted up on its edge, because he knew he could see trees on it. But Professor Snail and the others said, "You are hired to dig, sir, that is all. We need your muscle, not your brains. When we want your opinion on scientific matters, we will hasten to let you know. Your coolness is intolerable, too, loafing about here meddling with august matters of learning when the other labourers are pitching camp. Go along and help handle the baggage." The tumblebug turned on his heel uncrushed, unabashed, observing to himself, "If it isn't land tilted up, let me die the death of the unrighteous." Professor Bullfrog, nephew of the late explorer, said he believed the ridge was the wall that enclosed the earth. He continued, "Our fathers have left us much learning, but they had not travelled far, and so we may count this a noble new discovery. We are safe for renown now, even though our labours began and ended with this single achievement. I wonder what this wall is built of. Can it be fungus? Fungus is an honourable good thing to build a wall of." Professor Snail adjusted his field glass and examined the rampart critically. Finally he said, "The fact that it is not diaphanous convinces me that it is a dense vapour formed by the calorification of ascending moisture dephlogisticated by refraction. A few endiometrical experiments would confirm this, but it is not necessary. The thing is obvious." So he shut up his glass and went into his shell to make a note of the discovery of the world's end, and the nature of it. "Profound mind," said Professor Angleworm to Professor Field Mouse, "profound mind, nothing can long remain a mystery to that august brain." Night drew on apace, the sentinel crickets were posted, the glowworm and firefly lamps were lighted, and the camp sank to silence and sleep. After breakfast in the morning the expedition moved on. About noon a great avenue was reached, which had in it 2 endless parallel bars of some kind of hard black substance, raised the height of the tallest bullfrog above the general level. Scientists climbed up on these and examined and tested them in various ways. They walked along them for a great distance, but found no end and no break in them. They could arrive at no decision. There was nothing in the records of science that mentioned anything of this kind. But at last the bold and venerable geographer, Professor Mud Turtle, a person who, born poor and of a drudging low family, had, by his own native force, raised himself to the headship of the geographers of his generation, said, "My friends, we have indeed made a discovery here. We have found in a palpable, compact, and imperishable state what the wisest of our fathers always regarded as a mere thing of the imagination. Humble yourselves, my friends, for we stand in a majestic presence. These are parallels of latitude." Every heart and every head was bowed, so awful, so sublime was the magnitude of the discovery. Many shed tears. The camp was pitched and the rest of the day given up to writing voluminous accounts of the marvel, and correcting astronomical tables to fit it. Toward midnight a demoniacal shriek was heard, then a clattering and rumbling noise, and the next instant a vast terrific eye shot by, with a long tail attached, and disappeared in the gloom, still uttering triumphant shrieks. The poor camp laborers were stricken to the heart with fright, and stampeded for the high grass in a body, but not the scientists. They had no superstitions. They calmly proceeded to exchange theories. The ancient geographer's opinion was asked. He went into his shell and deliberated long and profoundly. When he came out at last, they all knew by his worshipping countenance that he brought light. Said he, "Give thanks for this stupendous thing which we have been permitted to witness. It is the vernal equinox." There were shoutings and great rejoicings. "But," said the angleworm, uncoiling after reflection, "this is dead summertime." "Very well," said the turtle, "we are far from our region. The season differs with the difference of time between the 2 points." "Ah, true, true enough, but it is night. How should the sun pass in the night?" "In these distant regions, he doubtless passes always in the night at this hour." "Yes, doubtless that is true, but it being night, how is it that we could see him?" "It is a great mystery, I grant that, but I am persuaded that the humidity of the atmosphere in these remote regions is such that particles of daylight adhere to the disk, and it was by aid of these that we were enabled to see the sun in the dark." This was deemed satisfactory, and due entry was made of the decision. But about this moment, those dreadful shriekings were heard again. Again the rumbling and thundering came speeding up out of the night, and once more a flaming great eye flashed by and lost itself in gloom and distance. The camp laborers gave themselves up for lost. The savants were sorely perplexed. Here was a marvel hard to account for. They thought and they talked and they thought. Finally the learned and aged Lord Grandaddy Longlegs, who had been sitting in deep study, with his slender limbs crossed and his stemmy arms folded, said, "Deliver your opinions, brethren, and then I will tell my thought, for I think I have solved this problem." "So be it, good your lordship," piped the weak treble of the wrinkled and withered Professor Woodlouse, "for we shall hear from your lordship's lips naught but wisdom." Here the speaker threw in a mess of trite, threadbare, exasperating quotations from the ancient poets and philosophers, delivering them with unction in the sounding grandeurs of the original tongues, they being from the Mastodon, the Dodo, and other dead languages. Perhaps I ought not to presume to meddle with matters pertaining to astronomy at all, in such a presence as this, I who have made it the business of my life to delve only among the riches of the extinct languages, and unearth the opulence of their ancient lore. But still, as unacquainted as I am with the noble science of astronomy, I beg with deference and humility to suggest that inasmuch as the last of these wonderful apparitions proceeded in exactly the opposite direction from that pursued by the first, which you decide to be the vernal equinox, and greatly resembled it in all particulars, is it not possible, nay certain, that this last is the autumnal equi? Oh, go to bed, with annoyed derision from everybody, so the poor old woodlouse retreated out of sight, consumed with shame. Further discussion followed, and then the united voice of the commission begged Lord Longlegs to speak. He said, "Fellow scientists, it is my belief that we have witnessed a thing which has occurred in perfection but once before in the knowledge of created beings. It is a phenomenon of inconceivable importance and interest, view it as one may, but its interest to us is vastly heightened by an added knowledge of its nature which no scholar has heretofore possessed or even suspected. This great marvel which we have just witnessed, fellow savants, it almost takes my breath away, is nothing less than the transit of Venus." Every scholar sprang to his feet pale with astonishment. Then ensued tears, handshakings, frenzied embraces, and the most extravagant jubilations of every sort. But by and by, as emotion began to retire within bounds, and reflection to return to the front, the accomplished Chief Inspector Lizard observed, But how is this? Venus should traverse the sun's surface, not the earth's. The arrow went home. It carried sorrow to the breast of every apostle of learning there, for none could deny that this was a formidable criticism. But tranquilly the venerable Duke crossed his limbs behind his ears and said, "My friend has touched the marrow of our mighty discovery. Yes, all that have lived before us thought a transit of Venus consisted of a flight across the sun's face. They thought it, they maintained it, they honestly believed it, simple hearts, and were justified in it by the limitations of their knowledge. But to us has been granted the inestimable boon of proving that the transit occurs across the earth's face, for we have seen it." The assembled wisdom sat in speechless adoration of this imperial intellect. All doubts had instantly departed, like night before the lightning. The tumblebug had just intruded unnoticed. He now came reeling forward among the scholars, familiarly slapping first one and then another on the shoulder, saying, "Nice Ike, nice old boy," and smiling a smile of elaborate content. Arrived at a good position for speaking, he put his left arm akimbo with his knuckles planted in his hip just under the edge of his cutaway coat, bent his right leg, placing his toe on the ground and resting his heel with easy grace against his left shin, puffed out his aldermanic stomach, opened his lips, leaned his right elbow on Inspector Lizard's shoulder, but the shoulder was indignantly withdrawn and the hard-handed son of toil went to earth. He floundered a bit but came up smiling, arranged his attitude with the same careful detail as before, only choosing Professor Darktick's shoulder for a support, opened his lips and went to earth again. He presently scrambled up once more, still smiling, made a loose effort to brush the dust off his coat and legs, but a smart pass of his hand missed entirely, and the force of the unchecked impulse slewed him suddenly around, twisted his legs together and projected him, limber and sprawling, into the lap of the Lord Longlegs. 2 or 3 scholars sprang forward, flung the low creature head over heels into a corner, and reinstated the patrician, smoothing his ruffled dignity with many soothing and regretful speeches. Professor Bullfrog roared out, "No more of this, Sirrah Tumblebug. Say your say and then get you about your business with speed. Quick, what is your errand? Come, move off a trifle, you smell like a stable. What have you been at?" "Please, Ike, please your worship, I chanced to light upon a find, but no euk, matter about that, there's Ike, been another find which beg pardon your honours. What was that, Ike? Thing that ripped by here first?" "It was the vernal equinox." "Inf Ike vernal equinox, at's all right, 500 Ike, dunno him, what's other one?" "The transit of Venus." "Gee, Ike got me again, no matter, Lars one dropped something." "Ah, indeed, good luck, good news, quick, what is it?" 1,000 Ike, mosey out NC, it'll pay." No more votes were taken for 24 hours, then the following entry was made. The commission went in a body to view the find. It was found to consist of a hard, smooth, huge object with a rounded summit, surmounted by a short upright projection, resembling a section of a cabbage stalk, divided transversely. This projection was not solid, but was a hollow cylinder plugged with a soft, woody substance unknown to our region. That is, it had been so plugged, but unfortunately this obstruction had been heedlessly removed by Norway Rat, chief of the sappers and miners, before our arrival. The vast object before us, so mysteriously conveyed from the glittering domains of space, was found to be hollow and nearly filled with a pungent liquid of a brownish hue, like rainwater that has stood for some time, and such a spectacle as met our view. Norway Rat was perched upon the summit, engaged in thrusting his tail into the cylindrical projection, drawing it out dripping, permitting the struggling multitude of labourers to suck the end of it, then straightway reinserting it, and delivering the fluid to the mob as before. Evidently this liquor had strangely potent qualities, for all that partook of it were immediately exalted with great and pleasurable emotions, and went staggering about singing ribald songs, embracing, fighting, dancing, discharging eruptions of profanity, and defying all authority. Around us struggled a massed and uncontrolled mob, uncontrolled and likewise uncontrollable, for the whole army down to the very sentinels were mad like the rest, by reason of the drink. We were seized upon by these reckless creatures, and within the hour even we, were undistinguishable from the rest. The demoralization was complete and universal. In time the camp wore itself out with its orgies, and sank into a stolid and pitiable stupor, in whose mysterious bonds rank was forgotten and strange bedfellows made. Our eyes, at the resurrection, being blasted, and our souls petrified with the incredible spectacle of that intolerable stinking scavenger, the tumblebug, and the illustrious patrician my lord granddaddy, Duke of Longlegs, lying soundly steeped in sleep, and clasped lovingly in each other's arms, the like whereof hath not been seen in all the ages that tradition compasseth, and doubtless none shall ever in this world find faith to master the belief of it, save only we that have beheld the damnable and unholy vision. Thus inscrutable be the ways of God, whose will be done. This day by order did the engineer-in-chief, Herr Spider, rig the necessary tackle for the overturning of the vast reservoir, and so its calamitous contents were discharged in a torrent upon the thirsty earth, which drank it up, and now there is no more danger, we reserving but a few drops for experiment and scrutiny, and to exhibit to the king and subsequently preserve among the wonders of the museum. What this liquid is has been determined. It is without question that fierce and most destructive fluid called lightning. It was wrested in its container from its storehouse in the clouds by the resistless might of the flying planet, and hurled at our feet as she sped by. An interesting discovery here results, which is that lightning, kept to itself, is quiescent. It is the assaulting contact of the thunderbolt that releases it from captivity, ignites its awful fires, and so produces an instantaneous combustion and explosion which spread disaster and desolation far and wide in the earth. After another day devoted to rest and recovery, the expedition proceeded upon its way. Some days later it went into camp in a pleasant part of the plain, and the savants sallied forth to see what they might find. Their reward was at hand. Professor Bullfrog discovered a strange tree and called his comrades. They inspected it with profound interest. It was very tall and straight, and wholly devoid of bark, limbs, or foliage. By triangulation, Lord Longlegs determined its altitude. Herr Spider measured its circumference at the base, and computed the circumference at its top, by a mathematical demonstration, based upon the warrant furnished by the uniform degree of its taper upward. It was considered a very extraordinary find, and since it was a tree of a hitherto unknown species, Professor Woodlouse gave it a name of a learned sound, being none other than that of Professor Bullfrog, translated into the ancient Mastodon language, for it had always been the custom with discoverers to perpetuate their names and honor themselves by this sort of connection with their discoveries. Now Professor Fieldmouse, having placed his sensitive ear to the tree, detected a rich, harmonious sound issuing from it. This surprising thing was tested and enjoyed by each scholar in turn, and great was the gladness and astonishment of all. Professor Woodlouse was requested to add to and extend the tree's name so as to make it suggest the musical quality it possessed, which he did, furnishing the addition anthem singer, done into the Mastodon tongue. By this time Professor Snail was making some telescopic inspections. He discovered a great number of these trees, extending in a single rank with wide intervals between, as far as his instrument would carry, both southward and northward. He also presently discovered that all these trees were bound together, near their tops, by 14 great ropes, one above another, which ropes were continuous from tree to tree, as far as his vision could reach. This was surprising. Chief Engineer Spider ran aloft, and soon reported that these ropes were simply a web hung there by some colossal member of his own species, for he could see its prey dangling here and there from the strands, in the shape of mighty shreds and rags that had a woven look about their texture, and were no doubt the discarded skins of prodigious insects which had been caught and eaten. And then he ran along one of the ropes to make a closer inspection, but felt a smart sudden burn on the soles of his feet, accompanied by a paralyzing shock, wherefore he let go and swung himself to the earth by a thread of his own spinning, and advised all to hurry at once to camp, lest the monster should appear and get as much interested in the savants as they were in him and his works. So they departed with speed, making notes about the gigantic web as they went, and that evening the naturalist of the expedition built a beautiful model of the colossal spider, having no need to see it in order to do this, because he had picked up a fragment of its vertebra by the tree, and so knew exactly what the creature looked like, and what its habits and its preferences were by this simple evidence alone. He built it with a tail, teeth, 14 legs, and a snout, and said it ate grass, cattle, pebbles, and dirt with equal enthusiasm. This animal was regarded as a very precious addition to science. It was hoped a dead one might be found to stuff. Professor Woodlouse thought that he and his brother scholars, by lying hid and being quiet, might maybe catch a live one. He was advised to try it, which was all the attention that was paid to his suggestion. The conference ended with the naming the monster after the naturalist, since he, after God, had created it. And improved it mayhap, muttered the tumblebug, who was intruding again, according to his idle custom and his unappeasable curiosity. End of part first. Some learned fables for good old boys and girls. Part second. How the animals of the wood completed their scientific labors. A week later the expedition camped in the midst of a collection of wonderful curiosities. These were a sort of vast caverns of stone that rose singly and in bunches out of the plain by the side of the river, which they had first seen when they emerged from the forest. These caverns stood in long, straight rows on opposite sides of broad aisles that were bordered with single ranks of trees. The summit of each cavern sloped sharply both ways. Several horizontal rows of great square holes, obstructed by a thin, shiny, transparent substance, pierced the frontage of each cavern. Inside were caverns within caverns, and one might ascend and visit these minor compartments by means of curious winding ways, consisting of continuous regular terraces raised one above another. There were many huge, shapeless objects in each compartment which were considered to have been living creatures at one time, though now the thin brown skin was shrunken and loose, and rattled when disturbed. Spiders were here in great number, and their cobwebs, stretched in all directions and wreathing the great skinny dead together, were a pleasant spectacle, since they inspired with life and wholesome cheer a scene which would otherwise have brought to the mind only a sense of forsakenness and desolation. Information was sought of these spiders, but in vain. They were of a different nationality from those with the expedition, and their language seemed but a musical, meaningless jargon. They were a timid, gentle race, but ignorant and heathenish worshippers of unknown gods. The expedition detailed a great detachment of missionaries to teach them the true religion, and in a week's time a precious work had been wrought among those darkened creatures, not 3 families being by that time at peace with each other, or having a settled belief in any system of religion whatever. This encouraged the expedition to establish a colony of missionaries there permanently, that the work of grace might go on. But let us not outrun our narrative. After close examination of the fronts of the caverns, and much thinking and exchanging of theories, the scientists determined the nature of these singular formations. They said that each belonged mainly to the old red sandstone period, that the cavern fronts rose in innumerable and wonderfully regular strata high in the air, each stratum about 5 frog spans thick, and that in the present discovery lay an overpowering refutation of all received geology, for between every 2 layers of old red sandstone reposed a thin layer of decomposed limestone. So instead of there having been but one old red sandstone period, there had certainly been not less than 175, and by the same token, it was plain that there had also been 175 floodings of the earth and depositings of limestone strata. The unavoidable deduction from which pair of facts was the overwhelming truth that the world, instead of being only 200,000 years old, was older by millions upon millions of years. And there was another curious thing. Every stratum of old red sandstone was pierced and divided at mathematically regular intervals by vertical strata of limestone. Upshootings of igneous rock through fractures in water formations were common, but here was the first instance where water-formed rock had been so projected. It was a great and noble discovery, and its value to science was considered to be inestimable. A critical examination of some of the lower strata demonstrated the presence of fossil ants and tumblebugs, the latter accompanied by their peculiar goods, and with high gratification the fact was enrolled upon the scientific record, for this was proof that these vulgar labourers belonged to the first and lowest orders of created beings, though at the same time there was something repulsive in the reflection that the perfect and exquisite creature of the modern uppermost order owed its origin to such ignominious beings through the mysterious law of development of species. The tumblebug, overhearing this discussion, said he was willing that the parvenus of these new times should find what comfort they might in their wise-drawn theories, since as far as he was concerned, he was content to be of the old first families, and proud to point back to his place among the old original aristocracy of the land. Enjoy your mushroom dignity, stinking of the varnish of yesterday's veneering, since you like it, said he. Suffice it for the tumblebugs that they come of a race that rolled their fragrant spheres down the solemn aisles of antiquity, and left their imperishable works embalmed in the old red sandstone to proclaim it to the wasting centuries as they file along the highway of time. "Oh, take a walk," said the chief of the expedition with derision. The summer passed and winter approached. In and about many of the caverns were what seemed to be inscriptions. Most of the scientists said they were inscriptions, a few said they were not. The chief philologist, Professor Woodlouse, maintained that they were writings, done in a character utterly unknown to scholars, and in a language equally unknown. He had early ordered his artists and draftsmen to make facsimiles of all that were discovered, and had set himself about finding the key to the hidden tongue, In this work he had followed the method which had always been used by decipherers previously. That is to say, he placed a number of copies of inscriptions before him and studied them both collectively and in detail. To begin with, he placed the following copies together. The American Hotel, meals at all hours. The Shades, no smoking. Boats for hire, cheap union prayer meeting, 4 p.m. Billiards, the Waterside Journal. The A1 Barber Shop, Telegraph Office. Keep off the grass, try Brandreth's pills. Cottages for rent during the watering season. For sale cheap, for sale cheap. For sale cheap, for sale cheap. At first it seemed to the professor that this was a sign language, and that each word was represented by a distinct sign. Further examination convinced him that it was a written language, and that every letter of its alphabet was represented by a character of its own. And finally he decided that it was a language which conveyed itself partly by letters, and partly by signs or hieroglyphics. This conclusion was forced upon him by the discovery of several specimens of the following nature. He observed that certain inscriptions were met with in greater frequency than others, such as for sale cheap, billiards, St. 1860-10, Keno, ale on draft. Naturally then these must be religious maxims, but this idea was cast aside by and by, as the mystery of the strange alphabet began to clear itself. In time, the professor was enabled to translate several of the inscriptions with considerable plausibility, though not to the perfect satisfaction of all the scholars. Still, he made constant and encouraging progress. Finally, a cavern was discovered with these inscriptions upon it. Waterside Museum. Open at all hours. Admission 50 cents. Wonderful collection of waxworks, ancient fossils, etc. Professor Woodlouse affirmed that the word museum was equivalent to the phrase Lumgath Molo, or burial place. Upon entering, the scientists were well astonished, but what they saw may be best conveyed in the language of their own official report. Erect in a row were a sort of rigid great figures, which struck us instantly as belonging to the long-extinct species of reptile called man, described in our ancient records. This was a peculiarly gratifying discovery. Because of late times it has become fashionable to regard this creature as a myth and a superstition, a work of the inventive imaginations of our remote ancestors, but here indeed was man perfectly preserved in a fossil state, and this was his burial place, as already ascertained by the inscription, and now it began to be suspected that the caverns we had been inspecting had been his ancient haunts in that old time that he roamed the earth, for upon the breast of each of these tall fossils was an inscription in the character heretofore noticed. One read, Captain Kidd the Pirate, another Queen Victoria, another Abe Lincoln, another George Washington, etc. With feverish interest we called for our ancient scientific records to discover if perchance the description of man there set down would tally with the fossils before us. Professor Woodlouse read it aloud in its quaint and musty phraseology, to wit, In ye time of our fathers man still walked ye earth, as by tradition we know. It was a creature of exceeding great size, being compassed about with a loose skin, sometimes of one colour, sometimes of many, the which it was able to cast at will. Which being done, the hind legs were discovered to be armed with short claws like to a mole's but broader, and forelegs with fingers of a curious slimness, and a length much more prodigious than a frog's, armed also with broad talons for scratching in the earth for its food. It had a sort of feathers upon its head such as hath a rat, but longer, and a beak suitable for seeking its food by ye smell thereof. When it was stirred with happiness, it leaked water from its eyes, and when it suffered or was sad, it manifested it with a horrible hellish cackling clamour that was exceeding dreadful to hear, and made one long that it might rend itself and perish, and so end its troubles. Two mans being together, they uttered noises at each other like this, Haw haw haw, damn good, together with other sounds of more or less likeness to these, wherefore ye poets conceived that they talked, but poets be always ready to catch at any frantic folly, God he knows. Sometimes this creature goeth about with a long stick ye which it putteth to its face and bloweth fire, and smoke through ye same with a sudden and most damnable bruit and noise, that doth fright its prey to death, and so seizeth it in its talons and walketh away to its habitat, consumed with a most fierce and devilish joy. Now was the description set forth by our ancestors wonderfully endorsed and confirmed by the fossils before us, as shall be seen. The specimen marked Captain Kidd was examined in detail. Upon its head and part of its face was a sort of fur like that upon the tail of a horse. With great labour its loose skin was removed, whereupon its body was discovered to be of a polished white texture, thoroughly petrified. The straw it had eaten, so many ages gone by, was still in its body undigested, and even in its legs. Surrounding these fossils were objects that would mean nothing to the ignorant, but to the eye of science they were a revelation. They laid bare the secrets of dead ages. These musty memorials told us when man lived, and what were his habits, for here, side by side with man, were the evidences that he had lived in the earliest ages of creation, the companion of the other low orders of life that belonged to that forgotten time. Here was the fossil nautilus that sailed the primeval seas. Here was the skeleton of the mastodon, the ichthyosaurus, the cave bear, the prodigious elk. Here also were the charred bones of some of these extinct animals, and of the young of man's own species, split lengthwise, showing that to his taste the marrow was a toothsome luxury. It was plain that man had robbed those bones of their contents, since no toothmark of any beast was upon them, albeit the tumblebug intruded the remark that no beast could mark a bone with its teeth anyway. Here were proofs that man had vague, grovelling notions of art, for this fact was conveyed by certain things marked with the untranslatable words: flint hatchets, knives, arrowheads, and bone ornaments of primeval man. Some of these seemed to be rude weapons chipped out of flint, and in a secret place was found some more in process of construction, with this untranslatable legend on a thin, flimsy material lying by: Jones, if you don't want to be discharged from the museum, make the next primeval weapons more careful. You couldn't even fool one of these sleepy old scientific grannies from the college with the last ones. And mind you, the animals you carved on some of the bone ornaments is a blame sight too good for any primeval man that was ever fooled. Varnum, manager. Back of the burial place was a mass of ashes, showing that man always had a feast at a funeral, else why the ashes in such a place, and showing also that he believed in God and the immortality of the soul, else why these solemn ceremonies. To sum up, we believe that man had a written language. We know that he indeed existed at one time, and is not a myth, also that he was the companion of the cave bear, the mastodon, and other extinct species, that he cooked and ate them and likewise the young of his own kind, also that he bore rude weapons and knew something of art, that he imagined he had a soul, and pleased himself with the fancy that it was immortal. But let us not laugh. There may be creatures in existence to whom we in our vanities and profundities may seem as ludicrous. End of part second. Some learned fables for good old boys and girls. Part third. Near the margin of the great river, the scientists presently found a huge, shapely stone, with this inscription: In 1847, in the spring, the river overflowed its banks and covered the whole township. The depth was from 2 to 6 feet. More than 900 head of cattle were lost and many homes destroyed. The mayor ordered this memorial to be erected to perpetuate the event. God spare us the repetition of it. With infinite trouble, Professor Woodlouse succeeded in making a translation of this inscription, which was sent home, and straightway an enormous excitement was created about it. It confirmed, in a remarkable way, certain treasured traditions of the ancients. The translation was slightly marred by 1 or 2 untranslatable words, but these did not impair the general clearness of the meaning. It is here presented. 1847 years ago the fires descended and consumed the whole city. Only some 900 souls were saved, all others destroyed. The king commanded this stone to be set up to, untranslatable, prevent the repetition of it. This was the first successful and satisfactory translation that had been made of the mysterious character left behind him by extinct man, and it gave Professor Woodlouse such reputation that at once every seat of learning in his native land conferred a degree of the most illustrious grade upon him, and it was believed that if he had been a soldier and had turned his splendid talents to the extermination of a remote tribe of reptiles, the king would have ennobled him and made him rich. And this, too, was the origin of that school of scientists called manologists, whose specialty is the deciphering of the ancient records of the extinct bird termed man. For it is now decided that man was a bird and not a reptile, but Professor Woodlouse began and remained chief of these, for it was granted that no translations were ever so free from error as his. Others made mistakes. He seemed incapable of it. Many a memorial of the lost race was afterward found, but none ever attained to the renown and veneration achieved by the Meritish stone, it being so called from the word Mer in it, which being translated king, Meritish stone was but another way of saying king's stone. Another time the expedition made a great find. It was a vast round flattish mass, 10 frog spans in diameter and 5 or 6 high. Professor Snail put on his spectacles and examined it all around, and then climbed up and inspected the top. He said, "The result of my perlustration and perscontation of this isoprometrical protuberance is a belief at it is one of those rare and wonderful creations left by the mound builders. The fact that this one is lamellibranchiate in its formation simply adds to its interest as being possibly of a different kind from any we read of in the records of science, but yet in no manner marring its authenticity. Let the megalophonous grasshopper sound a blast and summon hither the perfunctory and circumforaneous tumblebug, to the end that excavations may be made and learning gather new treasures." Not a tumblebug could be found on duty, so the mound was excavated by a working party of ants. Nothing was discovered. This would have been a great disappointment had not the venerable Longlegs explained the matter. He said, "It is now plain to me that the mysterious and forgotten race of mound builders did not always erect these edifices as mausoleums, else in this case, as in all previous cases, their skeletons would be found here, along with the rude implements which the creatures used in life. Is not this manifest?" "True, true, from everybody." "Then we have made a discovery of peculiar value here, a discovery which greatly extends our knowledge of this creature in place of diminishing it, a discovery which will add luster to the achievements of this expedition and win for us the commendations of scholars everywhere, for the absence of the customary relics here means nothing less than this. The mound builder, instead of being the ignorant, savage reptile we have been taught to consider him, was a creature of cultivation and high intelligence, capable of not only appreciating worthy achievements of the great and noble of his species, but of commemorating them. Fellow scholars, this stately mound is not a sepulchre, it is a monument." A profound impression was produced by this, but it was interrupted by rude and derisive laughter, and the tumblebug appeared. "A monument," quoth he, "a monument set up by a mound builder. Aye, so it is. So it is indeed to the shrewd keen eye of science, but to an ignorant poor devil who has never seen a college, it is not a monument, strictly speaking, but is yet a most rich and noble property. And with your worship's good permission I will proceed to manufacture it into spheres of exceeding grace and—" The tumblebug was driven away with stripes, and the draftsmen of the expedition were set to making views of the monument from different standpoints, while Professor Woodlouse, in a frenzy of scientific zeal, travelled all over it and all around it hoping to find an inscription. But if there had ever been one, it had decayed or been removed by some vandal as a relic. The views having been completed, it was now considered safe to load the precious monument itself upon the backs of 4 of the largest tortoises, and send it home to the King's Museum, which was done. And when it arrived it was received with enormous eclat, and escorted to its future abiding place by thousands of enthusiastic citizens, King Bullfrog Roman 16, himself attending and condescending to sit enthroned upon it throughout the progress. The growing rigour of the weather was now admonishing the scientists to close their labours for the present, so they made preparations to journey homeward. But even their last day among the caverns bore fruit, for one of the scholars found in an out-of-the-way corner of the museum or burial place a most strange and extraordinary thing. It was nothing less than a double man-bird lashed together breast to breast by a natural ligament, and labelled with the untranslatable words, "Siamese twins." The official report concerning this thing closed thus: "Wherefore it appears that there were in old times 2 distinct species of this majestic fowl, the one being single and the other double. Nature has a reason for all things. It is plain to the eye of science that the double man originally inhabited a region where dangers abounded. Hence he was paired together to the end that while one part slept the other might watch, and likewise that, danger being discovered, there might always be a double instead of a single power to oppose it. All honour to the mystery-dispelling eye of godlike science." And near the double man-bird was found what was plainly an ancient record of his, marked upon numberless sheets of a thin white substance and bound together. Almost the first glance that Professor Woodlouse threw into it revealed this following sentence, which he instantly translated and laid before the scientists, in a tremble, and it uplifted every soul there with exultation and astonishment. "In truth it is believed by many that the lower animals reason and talk together." When the great official report of the expedition appeared, the above sentence bore this comment: "Then there are lower animals than man. This remarkable passage can mean nothing else. Man himself is extinct, but they may still exist. What can they be? Where do they inhabit? One's enthusiasm bursts all bounds in the contemplation of the brilliant field of discovery and investigation here thrown open to science. We close our labors with the humble prayer that your Majesty will immediately appoint a commission, and command it to rest not nor spare expense, until the search for this hitherto unsuspected race of the creatures of God shall be crowned with success. The expedition then journeyed homeward after its long absence and its faithful endeavors, and was received with a mighty ovation by the whole grateful country. There were vulgar, ignorant carpers, of course, as there always are and always will be, and naturally one of these was the obscene tumblebug. He said that all he had learned by his travels was that science only needed a spoonful of supposition to build a mountain of demonstrated fact out of, and that for the future he meant to be content with the knowledge that nature had made free to all creatures, and not go prying into the august secrets of the deity.